The next morning it was time to leave Paracas, but not before a free included activity to Paracas National Reserve. We took a slightly less bumpy bus than before, and it drove round stopping at different viewpoints along the way, so we had a chance to see the turquoise waters and the red sand beaches, which were absolutely lovely. It was then time to stay on the bus and head to the next destination, which was Huacachina, a desert oasis in the middle of nowhere. But on the way there we stopped for some pisco and wine tasting, where we got to try about 5 different drinks, and some of them were really, really nice. And others, not so much. We then carried on to Huacachina, where we stayed at La Casa de Bamboo. Then dropped our bags and headed out for a little wander of the town, which turned out to be extremely small. So we headed straight for the oasis in the middle instead, which was absolutely stunning. And then we copied what every other tourist seemed to be doing and climbed the sand dunes at the sides. Turns out it was pretty hard to walk up and was a bit of a slog, but it only took about half an hour, and then we were at the top with the insane views. It was absolutely blowing a hoolie at this point. So we walked a bit further along and tried to get out of the wind a little bit. And on the other side saw a load of people skiing and sandboarding down the dunes, but we thought we'd save that for another time. Then we stayed to watch a dusty sunset before following Jack's lead back down the dunes, which turned out to be a pretty slow start for most of us. But then once we got into our stride, we got the hang of it. And then there was no stopping us, especially my mum, who decided to essentially sprint down the hill at the end of it.
Today was our last day in Huacachina, and we thought we'd book an activity before going to the next destination. So we dressed up in our buffs, hats and long-sleeved clothing and headed to the dunes, ready for some sand buggying. While I embraced my inner sand dune gangster, the driver ragged us around the dunes for a good 20 minutes, up and down, all over, oh my god. And here's some video evidence in case you don't believe it. What seemed like an eternity, he finally stopped to give us a breather and rest our screaming voices. He also let us climb on top of the dune buggy to have an impromptu photo shoot. After a short rest, we were back in the buggy, ready for our next stop. We got out, and as Jack was admiring the engine, the driver started waxing up the boards, because now it was time for sandboarding!
Mum's on tour! Mum's on tour! Mum's on tour! Mum's on tour!
After an exhilarating 30 minutes zipping down the dunes, we jumped back in the buggy for another scream fest and finished up at the oasis where we walked back into town. Here we emptied our shoes, which had at least a kilo of sand in them. And then we headed out for dinner, where Jack's eyes were bigger than his belly once more. At 2 p.m. it was time to get back on the bus and head to our next destination, Nazca. And this journey took about 3 hours.
We made our way to the Nazca Lines, making our way through this mountainous region. Nazca Lines were made 500 years BC. We made our way to the top of the viewing tower to see part of the 800 miles of lines. As well as straight lines, there are geometric shapes and animal and plant and tree outlines reflecting the local environment. Then we were back on the bus for our 11-hour overnight journey to Arequipa. We slept while Jack did some uni work.
We arrived in Arequipa at around 5:30 in the morning, and after not a lot of sleep we were dropped off at our accommodation, which turns out was apparently fully booked and had no record of our booking. So after a quick search online, we found an alternative, better place just down the road. We then only had about 6 hours to kill before check-in, so we headed to the local square to check out some of the old buildings, and for 6:30 a.m. on a Sunday morning, there were actually quite a few people there, because it turns out there was a military parade on, where we stayed for about half an hour to watch some very interesting marching. And then a couple of flags being raised by some Peruvian top brass. Then we had a bit more of a wander and some breakfast until 10 a.m. where we went on a walking tour, which included a trip to Alpaca World. where they aggressively fed out of your hands. But this place also taught you about alpaca wool. It's estimated that there's over 3.6 million alpacas in Peru, and it's the world's leading producer, and they make tons of stuff out of it, including something like this tabletta. After this, we had a wander around the different squares, taking in the views and the stunning buildings. Arequipa is known as the White City because its historic buildings are constructed from a white volcanic stone called sillar, and the city is framed by 3 volcanoes, including this one here called Misty. And then we finished on a rooftop bar with a drink of chicha, which is a fermented corn beer, the same as the one that we tried in Colombia, but this one had been mixed with fruit and tasted a lot nicer. Well, I thought so anyway. It was then time to check into our backup hostel, where we were pleasantly surprised and actually ended up being a bit glad that the first one was cancelled. We had a couple of hours chill and recuperation before we headed out for some sunset drinks and dinner, and then headed back for a good old sleep.
The next morning we were up and out early to start our 2-day trip of the Colca Canyon. But first we had to do a 5-hour bus journey to the town of Chivay in the Andes. Our first few stops were in Salinas y Agada Blanca, a national reserve where you can see vicuña, which, like the llama and the alpaca, is a form of camel and is known to have the finest wool in the world. On the other side of the road from the vicuñas, we were lucky enough to see a Peru rail train, and the driver even gave us a honk of his horn, which was a lot better interaction than with the vicuñas, who just ran away. At our next stop we tried some Inca maca tea, can best be described as leafy. Then we took in these crazy rock formations known as the castles of Patahuasi, before jumping back on the bus and continuing our journey. Since we're over 4,000 metres, our guide gave us lots of things to deal with the altitude, including agua de Florida that you put on your hands and smelt, and then a big bag of coca leaves, which you rolled up into a small pile and chewed on. It tasted absolutely gross. After we were finished chewing leaves, we pulled over to meet a farmer and his pack of llamas, and Beth got to give out some head scratches which her and the llama thoroughly enjoyed. Then our final stop was Mirador de los Andes, where you could see 6 different volcanoes at the same time. The area was absolutely covered in small stone piles, which were believed to give you luck as you travelled through the mountains. So the mums set about building us some luck for the rest of our trip through the Andes, and were very proud of the little stone piles they'd made. After winding through the mountain passes for the next few hours, we finally started heading downhill, and from the hillside we could finally see the town of Chivay. We checked into Hotel Nativa, which was included in the trip, where the bed came complete with 6 blankets and a duvet, and the shower pressure was surprisingly good. Then we were back on the bus and off on a trip to the volcanic thermal springs, where we had a dip in some 38-degree water for the bargain price of £3. That evening we went for a meal with the traditional Peruvian show, which included a band that was laying down some absolute bangers on the panpipes, and 2 dancers who did some traditional Peruvian folk dances. I then got involved in a ritual where I had no idea what was going on, but it came with a free shot, so I can't really complain. The final dance of the night was a Peruvian girl dancing with the devil. She started off by enticing the devil in with an orange, which he repeatedly failed to get out of her hand. She then took a bite of the orange, which caused her to have some sort of seizure on the floor, which was only made worse by the devil repeatedly whipping her with an old piece of rope. The devil then proceeded to revive the girl by taking off his smelly sandal and shoving it in her face. Brought her round incredibly quickly. This scenario then happened the other way round, but the devil was revived by her sitting on his face. The devil then did some press-ups, which she wasn't particularly impressed with. Then he just carried her around for a bit on the dance floor. Overall, it was a fantastic night of entertainment, after which we headed to bed ready for our trip the next day to the canyon. We woke up bright and early, grabbed some breakfast at the hotel, and started our journey to the Colca Canyon. Our first stop was the town of Yankee, where before school each morning, the children got together and danced around the fountain. The outfits and the routines were absolutely stunning, especially when combined with the traditional Peruvian village setting and the stunning backdrop of the mountains. At one point the moves and the rhythm got too much and the mums just had to join in. We continued our journey into the canyon, where we caught sight of our first Andean condor, but it turned out to be a man in a really big suit, who quickly developed a romantic affair with my mother. Colca Canyon is one of the deepest canyons in the world, even deeper than the Grand Canyon. Over the 70-kilometre length of the canyon, it varies in depth between 3,200 metres and 4,100 metres. Along the canyon walls you can see terraces used for agriculture, which were built before the Inca civilization and still used today. We continued along the canyon until we reached a viewpoint. From there we went on to get our first glimpses of Andean condors. These iconic birds can have wingspans of up to 3.5 meters and can live for up to 50 years in the wild. They use the thermal updrafts of the canyon to glide through the air and can reach altitudes of up to 5,000 meters. They're associated with the god of the sun in Inca culture. After we'd had our fill of the condors, we headed back down the canyon to the town of Yankee, which had some beautiful churches, unusual statues on its main square, and a large amount of Ray-Ban wearing alpacas. We treated ourselves to a drink made of the fruit of the local cactuses, which didn't look very appealing. Well, at least more appealing than this snake in a jar. Then we jumped back on the bus for a 5-hour journey back to Arequipa.
Today Jack spent the entire day doing uni work, so we had a gals' day. We chilled on the rooftop for most of the morning, and then headed out to Museo Santuarios Andinos, where we learned about Inca rituals and high-altitude ceremonies, where they basically just sacrificed a load of children. Then to lighten the mood we went out for coffee and cake, where I got this filthy chocolate eclair, and it was glorious. Then we headed to San Camilo Market, passing by some old buildings with massive wooden doors. And then when we got to the market, they sold everything you can think of. From a bowl of chicken lungs to dog ponchos, they had it all. And then we headed back to check on Jack and have a quick chill before heading out for some pasta, which was really good. And they even had this wheel of cheese where they'd use a blowtorch to melt it on the sides. And then chuck a load of pasta in, mix it all up, and then slap it on your dish. So I know what I'll be having next time. The next morning our alarms were set for 4:30 AM, so we jumped on a shuttle which took us to the bigger bus, where Jack did more uni work, and we took a 7-hour transfer from Arequipa to Puno, just on the edge of Lake Titicaca.
Al City!